So much for having me. So today we're going to do this reflective mentorship workshop that I've put on several times in my department, the chemistry department, as well as through the Engaged Teaching Hub for the university overall. So I'm really thankful for all of you who have come here today. We'll have some fun activities and hopefully we'll all discuss and learn from each other. Okay, so just as a quick intro, I will be your facilitator today. Ooh, more coffee maybe. And I am a graduate teaching consultant at the Engaged Teaching Hub here at UCSD. I'm a PhD student in chemistry and biochemistry. I'm excited to change this to doctor in about 2 weeks. So I have my thesis in 2 weeks, very excited for that. The defense. I've been a chemistry instructor here, as well as a mentor of about 32 students through the STARS program on campus, a couple programs in my own department, and through several research assistants I've had in our lab. So from all these experiences and from an experience I had as an undergrad, I became really passionate about mentoring. And through STARS, I actually became trained, got the mentorship training through like an 8-week program. And I was so excited by that program that I wanted to kind of share and expand it to other people in the university. So I would really love to hear from you all today. So at any point, if you would like to share from your experience, please feel free to type in the chat. I'm doing my best to keep an eye on that. If you'd like to talk out loud, maybe you can use the raise hand feature. I also have the participants window open, so I can keep an eye on that as well. Okay. So for today, we have a few discussion topics, just like 4 things that I think will be really helpful for kind of the graduate student kind of postdoc time of life. So first, we're going to start out by considering your positionality as a student. Maybe you're going to be an instructor, a TA, etc. So we're going to think about who you're going to be mentoring and then who you will also be mentored by. So we're in an interesting kind of phase in life where we're getting a lot of mentorship from people, and then we're also asked to mentor a lot of people. We'll talk about some communication skills that have been documented as useful for helping to have healthy conversations, build relationships based on trust, and resolve conflict. I've had to use them a lot, and I actually can say from experience that they've been very useful. Then we'll move into talking about how unconscious biases can impact mentoring dynamics and what can we do to kind of address this or confront this to strengthen and protect our relationships with our mentees and our mentors. And then finally, we'll give you all time to kind of meet in breakout rooms and think about what you want in your mentorship relationship and how you can advocate for a personalized mentorship experience, something that will work for you, because it's very different what works for each person. And I've had to kind of advocate for what works for me best, as opposed to maybe what my mentors think is a catch-all style. Okay, so to start out our first activity, I'd love to kind of get an idea of where you all see yourselves being a mentor in graduate school. So if you're comfortable, you can either share in the chat or out loud, where will you be a mentor, or maybe you're already a mentor. Some examples are maybe you're going to be a TA. Perhaps you're already mentoring people in research in your lab. Have you signed up for any on-campus or off-campus organizations to mentor? Let me know what you're doing, and then we can kind of tailor this workshop to what you all are involved in. So give a little bit of time to type or think about responses. All right, let's see. Abdullah, thank you. In your research lab, you're already mentoring and you've been an instructor. Okay, wow. That's two different fields, right? Teaching and research. Nice. And Ava, and again, if I say anybody's name wrong, correct me, please. TA, I'm going to mentor undergrads formally and informally. and mentoring graduate students as well through the Association for Women in Math, the Math Graduate Student Council, and Sloan Fellowship. Wow, super involved already. I love to see that. That's super exciting. I hope it's going to be really fulfilling, and I'm sure that your students will benefit. Yeah. I think it can be a really fulfilling experience. I know for me, sometimes if I'm feeling down about my research, mentoring someone younger has reminded me how fortunate I feel to have gotten into graduate school and hopefully be graduating from that. Okay, is there anyone else who's going to be mentoring that wants to share where they're going to be a mentor? See, we've had kind of a little bit of everything: research labs, instructors, TA, and associations. Okay, so keep thinking about that. And then if you think of anything, feel free to share later on. In case you weren't able to think of something, I will give you some examples that I think will probably impact you at your time here as a graduate student. So I kind of made this diagram. You're at the center in this diagram. So one axis of mentorship that you will most likely experience is first in research. Many of us have a research advisor who's kind of overseeing our thesis project and giving us feedback in our research and training us to become more and more an independent researcher. We also might have senior researchers in our lab. That could be kind of research assistants, that could be older graduate students, that could be postdocs, etc. And then finally, we have junior researchers, and these are the people that you will get a chance to mentor. This could be younger graduate students or undergrads. And I've had the privilege to mentor both undergrads and younger graduate students. Labs are very interesting because I feel like they're always changing. We're constantly getting in new people, older people are leaving. And so there will constantly be a flux of who is your mentor and who you're mentoring. Another axis some of you mentioned is teaching. So likely if you're teaching, you have a teaching or TA supervisor who's kind of guiding you through the process, or at least helping you with logistics. And then you're this really big mentor for the undergraduate students. It's kind of impressive how much they will look up to graduate students because we're somewhat like their peers, right? We're not that much older. At least when I was TAing, I actually had some undergrads who were older than me or my same age. And so they really value your feedback and your opinion, and you really have a chance to make a difference through your mentoring. Okay. And then the very last axis that maybe we don't always realize is professional development. So this could be other instructors or senior TAs, people on your thesis committee, people you meet along the way who help you get kind of involved in things you're interested in, maybe outside of your research. So for example, I've had the exciting opportunity to have an instructor who set me up on a fellowship to collaborate with community college instructors. So those community college instructors were also supporting me in my professional development. And then as you get older, you can kind of give advice to the younger graduate students on where to get involved, where to seek out opportunities for things that they're interested in. Okay, it's really fun to pass those things on. So hopefully somewhere in this diagram, maybe you see yourself, you've had some of these experiences, or you're going to be moving into mentoring these groups of students. Okay. So I'm going to pause here for a second before we move on to talking about those communication skills that can really help you to manage conflict, and then going over a case study. Does anyone have any questions, comments, anything they want to share? I'm going to pause for a few seconds.
I have one thing I'll say. I don't think I really understood that much about mentoring at the beginning of graduate school, but I've ended up, I don't know, picking up a lot of mentoring along the way. And I think it's one of the things that I've enjoyed the most and made me realize I actually wanted to go into academia. So highly recommend. That's all.
Thank you so much for sharing. I can relate a lot to that. Has been my favorite thing since being here, is mentoring people, especially research students in the lab. So I think that's a good sign. Yeah. If you like mentoring, you could probably do very well in academia because you get to mentor in so many different areas and so many different people. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's great to see that you're enjoying it as well. Okay, I'm sure your students are benefiting greatly too. Okay, so I'm going to go over some communication skills. And I know some of you might be thinking like, okay, like I'm in grad school, I know how to communicate by now. But I do see people and many of my friends engaging in some of these negative communication skills. So it's just kind of to highlight things that maybe you want to avoid when you are mentoring someone. And then the positive communication skills, again, you might be familiar with them, but it's a good reminder to use them because they really have been shown to be important for building trust in a relationship with the person you're mentoring. And if they can trust you, it's just going to be a better relationship overall. So these I use with the students in my lab, and I've used with students that I teach as well. So examples for positive communication skills, I think we all know that you want to have kind of like an open posture, be making eye contact with the person who's seeking help or advice from you, having pleasant facial expressions, active listening. So I know one thing that like I tend to do that I need to avoid is like maybe I have my phone and I'm kind of glancing over at my phone and getting distracted by emails while my mentees are talking to me. But I try really hard to put it away and just look at them, focus on what they're saying, and make sure that they know that they're important to me and what is happening is really important. Okay, and another way to do that is by nodding along when they're talking to you and asking questions. So this reflective listening, paraphrasing and summarizing, these are great ways to show that you're really listening. So to summarize what they're saying, you can pause and say, I hear that you feel concerned about this upcoming presentation. Am I understanding that correctly? Or you feel like this is a lot of work that you've been given. How can I best support you in making you feel comfortable? So these are ways for you to model that you are understanding your student or the person you're mentoring, and also to make sure you're on the same page. So I can't tell you how many times people think they're on the same page and they're really not. Another important one to show you care and to make sure the conversation progresses in a healthy manner is to ask open-ended questions. So instead of just saying like, are you stressed? Which is like a yes or no question, saying what factors are contributing to you feeling stressed right now and how might I help and support you? So those type of questions kind of lead to more answers and more discovery of what's going on, as opposed to just yes or no questions. And then finally, one of the best ones is if you can self-disclose about troubles you've had or things that were confusing for you at first. Like I did this with my students before we went over the thermodynamics chapter. All the students were really nervous. And I told them, hey, you know, when I was in college, thermodynamics was one of the chapters we were also the most nervous for, but it ended up being really fun. And just kind of disclosing that kind of shifted the whole lecture, because instead of them like freaking out over the thermodynamics chapter, they were like, oh, I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one. Like, okay, we've got this. And I just was really happy to see that shift. So people weren't like very stressed out about that chapter. Okay. Negative communication skills. And I admit that sometimes I have to work on not doing these. Moralizing, so judging a mentee's behavior. So if someone comes to you and they're being vulnerable and they're asking for support, the last thing you want to do is be judgmental of them or argue with them, or they're just never going to come to you again, right? They're going to ask someone else for support, look to a different mentor. Another one is kind of talking to them about what you would do as if what you would do is the best possible thing they could do, the best possible scenario. One I tend to fall into and I have to work on is not going off on tangents or telling a story. So they tell me something and I'm like, oh, when I was your age, I did this. And then I all of a sudden go off on this long story and I can just see my mentees being like, I thought we were talking about me. So I have to work on making sure that when my mentees come to me, they're the priority in the conversation that's happening, and that I'm showing that I'm patient and I have the time for them. Okay, so have any of these worked for you all? Are any of them new? I'm curious. You all might be really familiar with these, and it would be useful for me to know. Are these something you're all familiar with? Are any of these new? Let me know in the chat. Is there anything that you want to add? I'm super curious. If you want to talk out loud, you can also just go for it.
I feel like my biggest concern is usually talking too much. Like I get too excited and I'm like, oh, and you could apply for this fellowship, and why don't you do this? And this happened to us too. And I think that thinking about it is trying not to do any storytelling is probably a pretty good framework, because it's pretty difficult to realize you're doing it or stop quickly enough in the moment.
I agree with you. And my PI does it too sometimes. Like, okay, I got a really funny story. I told him that I was tired from too much work, and then he dives into a story about how he knew someone in his lab who slept on a blow-up mattress in the lab under the table and worked weekends. And I was like, I don't think this is really helping me. Are you suggesting that I sleep on a blow-up couch in lab and do more work? So that's just a funny example of how sometimes we can kind of get into that. And then I wasn't really sure why I was hearing that story. So thank you for also talking about your experiences.
So I've had an experience before where with one of my mentees asked me, about myself or like my experiences, and I kind of started telling them about my experiences, And so I don't know if like maybe I went off a little bit too much like talking about myself, but I kind of like it would be helpful to know kind of when's the right time to redirect the conversation back more focused to the mentee. So I'm not sure how I would kind of know.
That is a super valid point, right? Because you're writing the line between self-disclosure and honesty, and then dominating the conversation. So a little bit is good, too much can be, they're losing focus. Does anyone here, a lot of you seem to talk about falling into that storytelling. Does anyone want to share how they kind of balance that? Figure out when it's too much?
I think sometimes always thinking about, have I learned more about them than they've learned about me in this conversation? That can sometimes be helpful.
I think that's a great point. I look for the glazed over eyes as one thing, or if they start looking at their phone a lot. And I don't want to call you out, Abdullah, but I see you say sometimes you sense that you're overdoing it. How do you sense that? Could you share?
Yeah, sure. And I can open my video as well. One of the things that I try to usually do when I communicate, especially with students or coworkers, is to tell stories from my background when I hear someone has done something similar, or I think that story relates a lot. But I think that's problematic because sometimes you spend a lot of time talking about yourself, about your story, and about your background and experiences, and more than the time you would actually spend on addressing whatever issue that the other person is trying to share with you. So you'll go from that area of trying to show them that you understand and relate to their whatever they're experiencing, and you're showing empathy, to actually being self-centered in the way you're talking too much about yourself. It's usually very hard because sometimes you don't want to not say anything, because that shows that you don't know what you're talking about. You want to say, okay, I'm like, for example, a student comes to you or a mentee in the lab. I'm so excited. I've been coding like this thing for like 12 hours continuously for 3 days and it's not working. And you want to tell them, well, that's okay. That's part of research. You want to talk about it. when it happened to you, but so yeah, that it's hard to find the line where you should stop telling the story and when not to do it.
I wonder if we could even just like ask, like, if I'm very close with my mentee, maybe asking like, am I talking too much about me? Am I boring you? Which they might say, oh
Usually
no,
it's
not at
oh no,
all.
yeah, they're not
Yeah.
gonna. Only your really best and close friends will tell you, please shut up,
That's fair.
Yeah.
It's a tough one, maybe just with like practice. But I think we maybe as like grad students, we all like to talk about our experiences. So it's interesting to see that a lot of us have had that experience. I see in the chat someone say, I like long, sprawling epic stories and Wes Anderson like films, and I tend to go on rants sometimes. That is one of the best comments I've ever gotten. Is there anything you want to add to that? I don't understand Wes Anderson films, but maybe I shouldn't admit that here.
I don't know who that is to begin with.
Really like abstract movies. There's a new one coming out, but I watched the commercial and I wasn't sure what was going on. Okay. Well, this was really good. I really enjoyed hearing from all of you about your experiences, and thank you for self-disclosing and being honest. So I know I'm not the only one to fall into this kind of storytelling, kind of negative communication skill. But yes, I think it was Sergio asked, that was such a great question, because you're right. There is a line between you want to self-disclose and let them know. And as Abdullah said, that you've been there and you're coming from the same kind of point and you really want what's best for them, versus not going off on tangents and kind of realizing that now you don't even know how your story tied to the point you were trying to make.
There's one other piece of this that I don't know, because you were talking about glazed over eyes. I don't think I've usually gotten glazed over eyes, but I think that what happens is that we're meeting for sort of a mentoring conversation. And I've mentored a lot of people that are sort of close to me in age, or like other graduate students and stuff like that, which maybe cause, and even undergrads. But like it's like we slip, if I start chatting too much about, oh, and then this thing happened to me, blah, 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 we start slipping into like we're having lunch together. Like they seem entertained, and then they tell me a funny story, and then we're talking about someone we dated last year. But it's I don't know if that's a bad thing, because you want to bond with your mentee, but I don't know. That's kind of how it sometimes goes for me, is it's like we start just slipping into socializing if I start talking too much. I've
had that happen too. And I think maybe a good way, like, to do that a little bit, and then a good way to pull back is to be like, oh, I'm enjoying talking about this so much, but I do want to make sure that I've addressed your concerns. So let me pull it back and make sure I've addressed your concerns. And that way it's not like we're saying that we were bored about hearing about their lives or that we didn't enjoy it. They still feel open to do that, but then we make sure that like we're making them the priority. So I think that could be a good balance. But it sounds like they're comfortable sharing with you, at least like you are building like a foundation of trust. And then maybe it's just deciding, you know, what things you're comfortable sharing in that mentee mentor relationship, like how professional is it versus more of a friend kind of peer relationship. It's always challenging to navigate and figure out. Okay, let's see. So that was a wonderful kind of conversation I really enjoyed. I normally do this kind of case study, but I'm going to leave this in the copy of the slides for you all. Basically, it's an example of an interaction that could happen between you and a mentor, or between like a student and their research PI. And we usually read through it and talk about the positive and negative communication skills we noticed and how they could be improved. But I think we really benefited from the conversation we had, and I enjoyed hearing from you all. So this is something that if you want, you can do in your free time. But if you don't want to do this, I would highly recommend, as you go through graduate school, if you have maybe conversations where you received feedback or you gave feedback to someone and it didn't go maybe as well as you were hoping, maybe talking with your friends or analyzing, okay, what could I have done differently to, so let's pretend for a second that you're the mentee and maybe it's your research advisor. what could I have done differently with my communication such that I got out of that meeting what I needed? Okay. So for me, one thing is going into my meetings with my PI and letting him know this is the goal of the meeting I have with you. I'm really hoping to get, this paper submitted and ideas on how to improve my figures for my thesis, etc. So I start out with my goal, and then I try to go into one at a time, and keep us on time, because my boss's personal things are, he can sometimes just talk on and get really interested in the science, but then, I'm late for my next meeting. So I think this is a great thing to practice. And it especially helped me this past week. So I had to give some constructive feedback to one of my students, and I used a lot of the positive communication skills to make him feel heard, even though I had to kind of give him constructive feedback. So I used I hear you're feeling this way, maybe I can do this to make it easier on you. Can you do this? At first, I know it seems simple, but they can really do a whole huge change for you in your interactions you have with people. So I will leave this for you all. And we will go to talking about the next point, which is how your experiences and your history can lead to unconscious biases. And so this one I think is also really interesting for us all to discuss. So I'll just quickly throw up some of these examples I have. I think if you've been in academia and you've been in school for a long time, maybe you all have either had someone have an unconscious bias about you, or you've watched it happen to somebody else. And so these are from this training for mentors. Just one or two examples is that when looking at applications or resumes, male applicants, so it's the same resume with a male versus female name, male resumes were constantly given better ratings and more likely to be hired. And the really interesting thing about these studies is that it wasn't just men rating men as better or more likely to be hired, but men and women evaluators overall rated CVs as more likely to be hired if it had a male name on it. And there's many other studies you can look up and research, such as people evaluating verbal skills as lower if told a Black person provided them as if told a white person provided them. So there's no difference in the result. It's just who they believe the information has come from that leads to a lower rating. So these unconscious biases have severe impacts on us and on the people that we mentor. And because of these challenges that BIPOC and women face, it's important that we're aware of it. So studies of BIPOC and women faculty at predominantly white universities have shown that faculty of color experience isolation, alienation, and racism. Also sexist language, stereotypic views, and even as far as sexual harassment. And so these effects can lead people to feel like they're going to be judged due to the group they're a part of, which is called stereotype threat, but can also lead people to feel like they don't want to stay in that particular field. So knowing that there are unconscious biases out there, we will likely face them at some point or see someone else facing them. What can we do to kind of circumvent this or ameliorate the effects? So here are some points that we've read from books. So one of the best ways is to make sure you're interacting with women and BIPOC to listen to the concerns that they're expressing so that you can learn from their perspectives. So if you're not having a chance where you work to interact with lots of women and BIPOC, that might be a problem in of itself. But I can also suggest reading papers or books published by women and BIPOC on topics in your field. That can be a great way to hear from other perspectives if you're not hearing from a lot of people in your actual department. And there are a lot of resources out there. And then by reading on these papers or listening to people who are having experiences with unconscious biases in your field, this can lead you to examine your own behavior. And I think constantly, it's important that we're constantly every day examining our behavior. What can we do to make our department, our interactions with our mentors and our mentees more positive, and make sure that women in BIPOC are having better experiences. What should you do if you see someone exhibiting an unconscious biases? That's important to read the papers to know, because I've had instances where I've seen inappropriate behavior happening, and when I actually talked to the person who was affected, they told me that they did not want me to say anything. And so my natural gut instinct was to like stand up and say something and do something, but it was important that I talked to the mentor that was actually affected, and they told me to please not do anything. So that was having respect for the person's wishes. Another thing you can do, especially if you're leading classes or teaching, is to use inclusive language. I have a really bad habit of constantly using kind of male-centered language. I say you guys a lot, and I actually had students give me feedback at the end of my class saying that I need to work on not saying you guys as much, but saying you all or everyone. And so I was appreciative to get that feedback, because I know that is something I slip into very often. And then the last piece of advice that's also from this video that I'm going to share with you is to making sure everyone has their voices concerned and elevating unheard voices. So one great thing is if you're in a room and you see people who are going to be impacted by your choices, or you think about people who are going to be impacted by the choices you're making, but they're not in the room, what can you do to bring them into the room or bring their voices into the room? So a great example of this was in my department. We had a kind of graduate student association for chemistry, and we were trying to make a vote on something we were going to take to the department, and this was going to impact everyone in our department. And we looked around and we realized that it was an extremely white room, and it wouldn't really be fair of us to make decisions that were going to impact our whole department when the representation we had in the room was very poor. And so we had decided to do an overall vote from our department and request other people to pull in instead of assuming we knew what was best for other people. So these are some tips on things you can do, but I would also say this is a fun video to watch. Watch how to unsmart your own unconscious biases, and she has some tips. And then if you're like me, you might get down a rabbit hole, and there's a lot of other really great videos that this one will kind of link you to about how you can support people and reduce your unconscious biases and hear from unheard voices. So I would suggest taking time to do this. I think it can really improve your relationship with your mentees, and you can use it to support your relationship with your mentors. Okay, so before we move to our next and last section for the day, does anyone have anything they'd like to share on this topic from their experiences? Any insight? I'll do my 10-second wait. Make sure everyone's had a chance if they would like to.
So I had a professor last spring who also was saying you guys, but he did go on and ask the audience or the students if that was appropriate to be saying that he wishes to correct himself. But I guess everybody in the class was not really sensitive to that, and they but yeah, he kind of did express. So that's kind of one thing that popped into my mind right now from this discussion that you just presented. I'm not sure if there's like something I should have said or not, but yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing that, and I think that goes back to my experience where I feel it's better always to ask and listen to what people want, because in my particular situation in that class, there was someone who didn't feel included by my language. And so for me, it was good to change that. In your professor's situation, maybe no one there was kind of offended by it. But another thing that kind of like, for me, it was in my kind of feedback where I couldn't tell who said it, anonymous feedback, that's the word. So always, if you ask a question, being aware of how comfortable the people are with responding to you honestly. So I'm not sure if your professor gave out an anonymous survey or he just said like, hey, raise your hand if this is, something that makes you uncomfortable. Maybe some people out there felt uncomfortable but didn't want to raise their hand, or maybe he actually handled it perfectly and there was, no one in the class really was uncomfortable, and then that's fine. I think it's important to reflect on yourself and ask other people what in this specific situation would make you comfortable, because everyone is different, right? Like in my situation with my friend, I thought this is inappropriate behavior, I should stick up for her. But in that particular situation, she said, please don't, you're going to make it worse. I'm already having like a hard time. I just want you to listen to me. And so I don't think there's necessarily in a lot of these cases one right way to do things. It's important to listen to the person that you're going to be affecting. And so I think it was great that you and your professor like asked, what do you all want? What is your preference? So hopefully by asking and making it a comfortable environment or an anonymous environment, we can get good feedback on what people are comfortable with. Does anyone have thoughts they want to share on that? Because I'm not an expert at all whatsoever. That's just what I've tried, and I'm constantly improving, and I'm ready to learn from you all if you have better feedback on or other feedback you want to share. Okay. I see someone says, I actually didn't know that you guys could be sensitive to others. I'm an international student. I tend to copy sentences that people use here and thought that was normal. Thank you. I'm glad you said that, because I think growing up in Southern California, you guys was, or hey, dude, like we use that kind of for everyone. But there are people who don't really respond as well to it, or if they feel it's not as inclusive. So I'm trying to take that out of my kind of ingrained natural language. So I'm learning along with you as well. So I'm glad we could talk about that. Okay. So for this very last section of today, this is kind of, we're switching and talking specifically here about how you all can advocate for the supportive mentorship that you need. Okay, and so what I'm about to show you is I'm going to give you some tips that I compiled from myself and other graduate students, and what we've all found to be helpful during graduate school and we think might benefit you all. And then we'll go into an activity where you all can kind of brainstorm what you're looking for your mentorship, because it is a personalized experience, hopefully. Okay, so the first thing we all kind of agreed upon as graduate students was that embracing your individuality is very important. All of us have unique skills, attributes, and perspectives, and that's what got us to where we are now. And that's actually what a lot of people like the university wants. We have been hired or accepted into this program because we have these unique skills and perspectives that we can bring to the table. And by actually embracing your own unique ideas and skills, this is going to help you flourish. And I like to think of it as kind of your gift to your coworkers is your unique perspectives that you bring. Another thing that my friends and I learned kind of in the first year or two is to really make sure to find a work-life balance that works for you, that makes you successful in graduate school. And again, this is unique to each person. I've learned that I cannot work longer than 12-hour days. If I absolutely have to pull like a 14-hour day, it's not going to be my best work, and I'm going to be super tired the next day. I know there's a lot of parents out there who they need to work, 9 to 5 so they can be home with their kids. There's other people who work better at night. Maybe I've had a friend who had a sleeping disorder, and so he actually couldn't work in the early morning hours. He had to wait till later in the afternoon when his brain had woken up. So it's important that you find what works for you, and then you let that work for you, and you don't let comparing yourself to others make you feel like you're not doing what's right. So that's the third point, is we all kind of agreed that in graduate school, if you compare yourself to others, their achievements, their publications, etc., that's not going to really motivate you necessarily to succeed. Everybody's path's unique. Everybody has a unique research path, and I think you won't really be happy if you're always comparing yourself to others. And this is really nerdy, but you guys should look up, you all, correcting myself, should look up the Bone Wars. I was just reading a book about two scientists who spent their whole life competing with each other and trying to sabotage each other, and they ended up kind of dying unhappy, but they did publish about like 12,000 papers together. So we learned about dinosaurs a lot from them, but they kind of died in a constant battle with each other. So I feel like that's kind of sad that they spent their whole lives comparing the number of publications each of them have. Super nerdy, but check it out. It's really funny in a sad kind of way. Okay, another piece of advice is figuring out what success looks like to you and sharing this with your mentors. This is one of the best pieces of advice I could give you. I was lucky to start this out early. I told my boss and my friends and my coworkers that I really cared about teaching and educating. And so then people who cared about me started informing me of opportunities that might benefit me. And then I was able to apply to some really cool fellowships. So I think when you get in with a research advisor, letting them know these are opportunities I would like to pursue. If you hear about these things and you can tell me about these, fellowships, internships, etc., this would be in line with my interests. I think that can really help you bring in opportunities that you might not have heard about. I think it's also great, and a lot of us kind of mentioned, vocalizing your communication style. Some people want to meet with their advisors weekly. Some people only want to meet when they have updates, and telling your advisor what works best for you or communicating that somehow early on can really help you kind of personalize your experience. And then if you're a person like me who likes a lot of feedback, requesting it. I wasn't getting a lot of feedback early on. I went from getting grades as feedback to just nothing, just doing research. And I had no idea what people thought of me or if I was achieving enough. And so I started asking my PI, how are things going? How do you feel my research success is? Asking my committee, asking for that support so I could know how to kind of keep on pace and make changes and reroute my project when needed. I actually had to kind of change projects in my third year. And I think if I didn't have a supportive network that gave me feedback, I wouldn't have known this. So again, it's very important in grad school. I know sometimes we kind of get into studying or working and we're not meeting a lot of people, but going to those networking and social events and meeting other advisors and professors is really beneficial. You never know who's going to be able to support you when you need it. Whenever I have a problem or something I'm troubleshooting, I kind of talk about it with as many people as possible. I get all kinds of ideas from different perspectives, and I'm actually able to kind of get to a solution sooner because I've heard all these unique perspectives that have really kind of got the brain juices flowing. Okay. And then again, finding people to monitor your support, monitor your progress. So that goes in with requesting feedback and support, is asking for that feedback and support, and then asking people to also let you know how they think you're progressing during graduate school. And then last of all is, and maybe arguably the most important, is demonstrating your appreciation for the people who are mentoring you. So a lot of times I will send thank you letters. I'll stop by and say thank you. I try to pass on the favor whenever possible. This is super important, and it also serves as positive reinforcement, right? People want to help people who are appreciative. And so that's like one of my number one goals, is to always try to give back or show appreciation to the people who have supported you at your time here. Okay, so again, now it is time to hear from you all, but I think it would be really beneficial if you were getting to work together. So in our last minutes here, I want to give you a link to a handout. So let me copy this link. And it's going to be just a place for you all to kind of brainstorm together from maybe something you heard today, something you have discussed previously, but what are the mentorship principles that are important to you and what you want to advocate for. So let me minimize my screen. Seems to look really strange right now. I don't know if that's strange for you all too. And I'll share the Google Doc. Okay, so let's see. All right, that link looks like it went through because I see that was a cool effect. I've never seen that before, to be honest, Abdullah, and it's still on my screen. I'm a little bit concerned. Okay, but it looks like the Google Doc made it through, and that's what's important. So let's see, for these last 8 to 10 minutes or so, I'm going to put you all in breakout rooms and you can work on this and kind of brainstorm together. And then if you'd like to kind of share out when we come back, I would love to hear what you came up with. So let's look at these breakout rooms. Let's do 3 groups, okay? So I'm going to do automatic breakout rooms, and then I'll give you a heads up when we're ready to get back. The instructions are on the first slide. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask or call me to your room. Okay, I'll open the rooms now. All right. Looks like